fortunate to have joined by Sara, Harb, Loginov, Luthfi, Dhofier, Lloyd-Kuizk. Over the past 3 months, all 5 of us have been working with the City of Vancouver on the topic of greening Vancouver's fleets. Specifically, we've been looking at the topic of greening Vancouver's private fleets. These are fleets that are owned by the private sector. So, for example, taxi companies, ride-share companies, tour bus companies, etc. An overview of what we're going to be talking about in our presentation. We're going to talk about the problem that induced our project, the methods, the research methods that we've applied, the best practices that we've learned from our research, and finally, we're going to share a few of our final recommendations for the City of Vancouver. The problem. Internal combustion engine vehicles contribute 37% to Vancouver's annual greenhouse gas emissions total. And the City of Vancouver has identified this as a problem. This is why in their renewable strategy of 2015, they include their desire to decarbonize the transportation sector. But they need more information on the most effective policies, strategies, and timelines and targets to adopt in order to transition private fleets to zero-emission vehicles. Zero-emission vehicles are electric vehicles, they do not emit carbon. Upon initial conversations and consultations with our clients, which is the City of Vancouver, we came up with 3 objectives of what we want to deliver to the city at the end of our project. The first is that we want to deliver the opportunities that exist for transitioning private fleets to zero-emission vehicles. We also wanted to identify the challenges to transitioning and solutions to those challenges. And finally, we wanted to identify the key processes that the city needs to take in order to transition fleets from internal combustion engine vehicles to zero-emission vehicles. And to answer all these questions, we decided to do a targeted jurisdictional scan of cities around the world that have led the way in transitioning a major part of their city to zero-emission vehicles. And I'll now pass it on to Alex, who's going to give us a bit about the jurisdictional scan.
Thank you. So the greenhouse gas emissions in Vancouver amount to 2.4 million tons annually, 40% of which comes from transportation. As a part of the Green City Action Plan, Vancouver has set ambitious goals to reduce these emissions. By 2030, the city is aiming for a 50% reduction in carbon pollution, while 55% of its energy is to come from renewable sources. By 2050, the carbon pollution is to be reduced further by 80%, while all of Vancouver's energy is to come from renewable sources. And so our team has conducted a jurisdictional scan to see what the leading cities are doing successfully in their transition towards low and zero emission transportation. For our selection criteria, we have chosen the cities with the highest number of electric vehicles as a percentage of the total market share, as identified by the International Council on Clean Transportation. All cities included are also members of the C40 organization of the greatest cities that take bold climate action, leading the way towards a healthier and more sustainable future. And so the list of our cities includes Amsterdam, Oslo, London, Paris, Los Angeles, and Stockholm. The policy options from these cities are evaluated based on their success and their applicability to the city of Vancouver. Further, our team has conducted a number of interviews with key stakeholders to identify some of the major opportunities and barriers that fleet operators face in their transition towards low and zero emission fleet. And now Sara will talk about those in greater detail.
So to move forward with an action plan in order to decarbonize the transportation sector, we really need to understand the key barriers and opportunities that exist. And there are 3 main factors that hinder the rate of EV uptake, the first one being affordability. So the EV market is still quite nascent, and therefore the high purchase price is mainly due to the high cost of technology. Second, range anxiety remains a major concern for potential EV consumers. And therefore, the state of the charging infrastructure plays a critical role in their decision-making. And thirdly, lack of awareness. So potential consumers may not be fully aware of the benefits of transitioning to EV. They may also lack familiarity with government incentives that are available. So in terms of fleets, they contribute to a large proportion of the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from the transportation sector. And that is why understanding the needs of fleet owners would help in coming up with more strategic and effective policymaking in order to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon transport sector. So the first challenge identified is the high upfront capital requirements. This is particularly a challenge for larger-sized fleets as well as smaller organizations, as they may not have the capital required to transition their fleets. And second, capacity of charging stations at facility. Although this is more of a mature market problem, early stages of planning is required in order to facilitate a smart grid strategy to enable mass charging. And thirdly, lack of EV models. So currently suppliers are not manufacturers are not delivering medium and heavy duty models as the market is still in the early stages. So apart from the environmental benefits such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing noise pollution, and enhancing the air quality, fleet owners are looking at more specific motivators in order to transition to electric vehicles. And the first incentive is cost savings. So when considering transitioning their fleets into electric vehicles, one of the key motivators is looking at the total cost of ownership of the fleet over the lifetime of the vehicle, and this would generally come through savings from fuel costs as well as maintenance costs, as EVs cost much lower to maintain. And second, sustainability goals. So by setting corporate strategies of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning their fleets to electric vehicles, companies can identify key factors that would help them with this drive, and this would come in terms of risk mitigation as well as preparing for potential regulatory measures. And third, brand reputation. So industry leaders would want to get ahead of the game by, for publicity reasons, as well as trying to benefit and gain from the first mover's advantage. And finally, policy incentives. This plays a crucial role when it comes to motivating fleet operators, as it would help them by reducing the purchase price through helping with funding, as well as other incentives such as funding charging infrastructure and other forms of partnerships.
Right, so the jurisdictions we reviewed responded to these opportunities and challenges in many different ways. So what I've done here is to try to kind of consolidate them into broad municipal policy kind of strategy areas. Now the list is not exhaustive. I mean, there are many different responses to these opportunities. But it does characterize in a pretty comprehensive way the leading strategies used by the leading cities in the world for private fleet, electric vehicle transitions, sorry. There we go. All right, so uncertainty around the commercial viability of electric vehicles is identified as a significant barrier in the adoption within private fleets. So, will these vehicles be able to perform in an equivalent way to their internal combustion counterparts? And so leading municipalities actually work very closely with private fleet owners and managers to address these uncertainties and to provide them with information and experiences to alleviate their concerns. So one great innovative example comes out of Stockholm. The municipality actually acted as kind of like an electric vehicle library. They lent out electric vehicles to private fleet operators for free on a week-by-week basis, and then surveyed their experiences, learned how the electric vehicles were incorporated into the fleets, giving drivers as well as managers an opportunity to see how they would fit in. And then the city of Stockholm then turned around and used this insights, this data, to then design better policies to promote electric vehicles within fleets. Now, poor access to charging infrastructure was also identified as a key barrier. It increases uncertainty around performance capabilities of vehicles, access, in the positive light, access to charging infrastructure reduces the uncertainties around range anxiety, and also reduces downtime for charging. If there's access to charging where the vehicle's needed and where they park already, they won't have to go back to the vehicles to charge and lose more time. A couple of great examples of this, of municipalities partnering with private fleets. London is an example. An astounding 60% of the charging infrastructure deployed in downtown London has actually been reserved for the use by Black Cabs, which is the company that kind of dominates the cab ecosystem in that city, so that the cabs have charging where they need it over the area they need to operate within. Another great example, the city of Amsterdam actually deployed, administrated a large demand-driven public charging infrastructure project. By demand-driven, I mean private citizens and businesses could register their need for a charging station at a particular location in the city. So then the city could use this information to decide where do we need to have these charging infrastructure, charging stations. And as the literature and many experiences corroborated in our research, the location of charging infrastructure is as, if not more important than the number of charging infrastructure in the city. And another great major policy lever available to municipalities is zoning, in particular low emission zoning. What I mean by that is it's usually an area, as you can see in the map over there, it's kind of small, an area in the center of downtown, the main economic area, where higher rating vehicles are either excluded or they are charged a toll for access, so it increases the cost. So this actually creates a competitive incentive for private fleets to adopt cleaner vehicles to then fall under the threshold to access these economic centers. Also, interestingly, it affects visiting fleet vehicles, not just domestic ones as well from the city. And also something that the leading jurisdictions did and was, establish a space, establish a zone, and of course increasingly ramp up the stringency, ramp up the areas, and also helping fleets along the way to make sure that they are able to comply and have the information that they need. So these kind of broad areas, as well as some other ones, compatible and complementary policy areas at the national levels and regional levels, kind of combine to create highly favorable environments for private fleets to begin expanding their zero-emission vehicle strategies or fleet components. So Luthfi is actually going to go ahead and talk about how Vancouver can use some of these lessons we've uncovered in the city.
Okay, so based on the lessons that we learned from other jurisdictions, we came up with 3 different recommendations. The first is to promote technology awareness to private fleet managers. Private companies are generally interested in adopting new technology, but there are a lot of uncertainties associated with adopting new technology, including zero-emission vehicles. So it is critical for City of Vancouver to help private fleet managers to reduce uncertainties associated with using zero-emission vehicles. We recommend that one way to do this is to develop vehicle testing programs like what we see in Stockholm that will give private fleet managers with first-hand experience in using zero-emission vehicles. We also think that it's important for the city to provide resources and tools to help fleet managers understand how zero-emission vehicles can reduce operational costs. The second recommendation is to create demand-driven charging infrastructure. Obviously, charging, like Nick said, locations is more important than the number of charging infrastructures. So we believe that the city must identify key locations for charging stations, and they can work with fleet managers to identify or to get data pertaining to their driving patterns, so these charging stations can be placed in more efficient places. We also believe that private fleets need to have their own designated charging stations to make sure that they will always have access to charging stations. And the last recommendation is to create low emission zones. Low emission zones obviously good not only to decongest high traffic areas, but also to discourage or disincentivize the use of internal combustion engine vehicles. And it is also important strategy to essentially signal all fleets that it is time for them to transition to zero emission vehicles. 2 things that we need to keep in mind is to start slow and gradually increase stringency and coverage areas for these low emission zones. And the city, we believe that it must communicate well in advance with private fleets to ensure that private fleet managers can comply with the policy effectively. So let me just end with some future considerations. So the EV market and technology is constantly evolving and ever changing. The battery capacity of electric vehicles continuously to increase, and the production cost of zero-emission vehicles will eventually come to close to parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. So this is the kind of future that the City of Vancouver must deal with, and if they take into consideration about how to adjust the charging station infrastructure and all the overall policies according to the technological curve, then I think, or we think, that the future of EV or ZEV ecosystem in Vancouver will be bright. So with that, I want to end our presentation and open for Q&A.
understand that Uber is coming to Vancouver at the end of the year. So I'm wondering how the city of Vancouver has rationalized, I don't know if you guys chat about this with your clients, about why they're bringing Uber and at the same time kind of pushing for these kinds of policy changes. And then how might the existence of Uber affect your policy recommendations?
Well, first of all, we believe that the existence of ride-sharing companies should not deter the electrification or transition to zero-emission vehicles, right? In London, Los Angeles, Uber actually took leadership where they give more pay to drivers who drive electric vehicles. So, if anything, this can perhaps serve as an opportunity for Vancouver to add the amount of electric or zero-emission vehicles in the road.
So just to add to that, for example, in London, Uber, as an early adopter, is taking the initiative by charging a cleaning fee to all the rides, so that, let's say, 50 cents per kilometer or something like that, and then that fund goes towards helping drivers transition or like convert their vehicles to electric vehicles. So they're using that as a funding opportunity.
Also, it's important to remember that a lot of the policies and approaches that are used to incentivize the adoption of electric vehicles isn't confined to just fleets or just the general consumers. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. Obviously, we focused primarily on the things that were fleet-facing actions by municipal governments that they could use. But certainly, as Vancouver becomes more, electric vehicle friendly, which will happen as municipal fleets continue to transition, as general consumers continue to buy cars, and the market changes. Ride-sharing companies where drivers own their own cars. I mean, they're not like a totally separate group from your average, car consumer. So as the city becomes more favorable, or the environment becomes more favorable, there's no reason to believe. And based on the other case studies as well, it's actually maybe the ride-hailing companies might even be great partners in that, because they, more than just your average consumer, you actually have a message pathway. If you deal with the organization, they can deal with also all their drivers and things too. Oh.
Thank you for your great presentation. I have a question about who you constitute as private fleets. I'm not sure if I missed it, but I would assume that car sharing companies such as Car2Go and EVO would fall within that. All right. Yes. So I'm wondering what the City of Vancouver, what kind of pressure the City of Vancouver is putting on companies like Car2Go to introduce more electric vehicles, as opposed to the smart cars, for example, that don't necessarily function that way. And what challenges do you foresee as Vancouver continues to be the city in North America with the largest number of cars that are used for car sharing?
I'm going to take the first part of that question. So in terms of private fleets, you're very correct. Ride-sharing companies are part of that, taxis, tour bus companies, etc. In terms of what the City of Vancouver has done in transitioning, in helping to transition some of these companies, it's very much in the developing stages, where in discussions we've had about climate, it's been more about consultation. This is kind of where we come in, and this is also the point of our collaboration. But also in terms of what the City of Vancouver has done for maybe ride-sharing companies that have electric vehicles. There's about 8 to 9 fast charging stations around Vancouver. The city has also created at least 75 level 2 charging stations. So these are non-fast chargers, but they're just normal chargers for electric vehicles. The rest of it will be like where our recommendations coming. Hopefully that can make a significant change.
And in our experience, some of these ride-sharing companies are like other companies, are eager to make the transition. It's good for their image. It's modern. It lowers their operation costs and maintenance costs and things like that in the right market circumstances. But one of the barriers, they have to have high confidence. You talked about uncertainty, technological uncertainty. They have to have high confidence that they can actually do this in Vancouver. And the places that Car2Go, as an example, has actually deployed 100% electric fleet: Amsterdam, Stuttgart, and one more. I can't remember the last city, but those are cities where the charging infrastructure and the general EV environment is just a little bit more mature. For example, there's higher interoperability between charging stations. What that means is, a user of a given car could use a higher percentage of all of the charging stations available in the city. Right now, in many cities that are like Vancouver, kind of developing this infrastructure, you need to have many different accounts or touch cards and things like that to access a lot of these charging stations. And some of the places like Amsterdam, for example, is a world leader in terms of charging infrastructure. They've done you can pretty much access like any charging infrastructure with like one card in the whole country, which is pretty incredible. And there's lots of course, details on how they got there and how it's different from here. But those are some of the things that these ride-sharing companies would have to think about. It's just how easy is it to actually do. I think if you build it, they will come. It's one of the kind of schools of thought. It's not the whole picture, but it's part of the picture. Yeah. Maybe in the back corner. That's our esteemed client. So.
Thank you for that presentation. That was great. Oh, this mic is super strong. I really appreciated that you focused on what actions that were within the jurisdiction of the city to control. But I'm also curious, you mentioned a little bit about the federal and provincial policies and programs that might actually also need to be complementary to this. Did you examine a little bit to what degree that some of those policies and programs might need to be in place in order to actually support that transition? Like, for example, like without improving fuel standards, to what degree would even the actions that we could take with creating some low emission zone really be able to affect the transition to decarbonizing big, large private fleets?
Yeah, we definitely came across a lot of policies in other jurisdictions in other countries and other cities where those policies actually come from the higher laws, the provincial and the national government. You mentioned about the low emission standard, but also the incentives, the purchase incentive. Usually this incentive comes from either provincial or national government, which is why we didn't include it in our recommendation. But in our report, we do mention that and those things, and kind of make a point where it is also important that the city may want to communicate and talk to the provincial and national government to help support this mission.
So some of the national policies that the UK, for example, is implementing, and that has really helped in the actions that the city is taking, is having an EV sales mandate, as well as having more targeted policies towards fleets. So for example, they said taxi drivers' vehicle registration, so whenever they want to renew their taxi license, they would have to have, so given targets like targeted years, they would have to have electric vehicles in that regard. And the second one would be that taxis are offered a higher rebate incentive in order to convert their vehicles, so they would get a higher fee or a higher rate in order to purchase new vehicles and to retire their old vehicles.
Just exactly a week ago today, the federal government of Canada tabled its budget. The Honorable Bill Mogo, which is the finance minister, he announced that the government will be investing $300 million over the next 2 years in funding people who are interested in buying electric vehicles. So $5,000 for any purchase of a car that's less than $45,000, and then $130 million over the next 5 years to enable Canada-wide investments in charging infrastructure. So that was something that we didn't have when we started this project, and to see that happen just a week before now was a very welcome initiative, seeing the federal government investing in this.
Now, one of the things actually I think where Vancouver and other cities like us, could come into to help informing and elevating that conversation is, it's a good idea. It's $5,000 for under $45,000 per vehicle. But a lot of fleet vehicles, commercial electric vehicles, are going to be way more expensive than that. And I think that generally people don't think of electric vehicles or private fleets as a when you talk about electric vehicle transition, most people just think about it as general consumers, the average person. And I think that cities have a role to play in learning about their own fleets to communicate what they need upward, and to say that if there are absolutely no options for a lot of fleets, a vehicle sub $45,000, then that threshold is not helpful for private fleet transitions. And maybe cities in learning through their own fleets have more granular, specific, actionable information to relay upward to the province, to the national government as well. To make a second clause with more fleet-specific incentives.
So I understand that having charging infrastructure is key to supporting this transition, but when we're thinking also about heavy-duty and medium-duty vehicles where the charging standards are quite varied right now, there's not really a good industry standard. How have other municipalities managed that or been able to support that transition from medium-duty to heavy-duty vehicles when there might not be that just single standard for that infrastructure?
I'm gonna address this by talking a little more about Oslo, and the charging infrastructure is something that they're having trouble with now, just because of the really big number of electric vehicles that are on the road in Norway, which is over 200,000, and it's the leading number in the world. So from what's happening there, we can draw lessons. So they're about 30 years ahead. They started their EV program about 30 years ago in the 1990s. So they've had a really long time to adjust and to see how the whole market is going to play out. And what's happening now is that the charging infrastructure, particularly in Oslo, it's working at its max capacity. And this is something that we address in our report. So one of the recommendations that we will give you is that we need to anticipate the energy needs that are brought with the increase in electric vehicles. That includes heavy and medium sized vehicles. Right now, it's really hard to say how exactly the charging infrastructure can adjust to having those added, because there aren't many models available right now. So this is not like when it comes to heavy and medium sized vehicles, the market is in very early stages. But cases like Oslo, it gives us insight into what the Vancouver, in regards to the city infrastructure, can anticipate in the future, which is the fact that charging infrastructure needs to evolve to be able to go along with the demand, with the increasing demand.
And also, the more we know about our own fleets, the better we can plan what demand will be, especially regarding heavy-duty vehicles. Those technologies they exist. They're extremely expensive to the point where almost no companies could really meaningfully deploy them on a large scale. And same with their charging infrastructure. I think it's something it's almost too early to call. Medium infrastructure, or rather medium-duty vehicles, a little bit easier again, but there still are a limited number of models available. So a lot of these solutions are aftermarket. So various firms will specialize in reducing consumption of fuels or electrifying medium vehicles, not exactly in a standardized way. But certainly, as the Vancouver market matures and we have a better sense of the demand for medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles, that'll be something that I think will be best approached in partnership with those fleets to learn their driving patterns, to learn where the actual pain points are in the city, in their routes, and then take it from there. Hopefully, then also the other leading cities in the world will have better ideas as well. We can learn from them too at that point.
Just following on Alex, your point on the Oslo example, I was wondering, your analysis sort of used leading practice examples. Did you find any examples or jurisdictions that had failures that you could learn from, or if there are?
With respect to charging stations?
Your whole presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example from Paris, where the city of Paris tried to develop its own, or a PPP project with a private company to develop its own ride-sharing service. It's called AutoLib. And that project was rolled out in 2011, but it could not compete with other ride-sharing companies such as Uber and all that. So it went bankrupt in 2018. So that's an example of failure, which before we use that as a recommendation, we have to analyze that further.
Okay, just quickly, with the low emission zone in London, they're continuously expanding it and increasing stringency. However, they have given exceptions to black cabs, and that has caused backlash from the public. The other cab drivers who feel they're discriminated against, and the reason that they did give these exemptions to black cabs was because they had to follow certain charging fees, they had to follow certain rules, and their cars accommodated disability, like accessibility and all that. So that's one concern that the government should be sensitive to.
This is outside of our jurisdictional scan, but something that we found is that in Tokyo and Japan in general, is that the country have invested so much in the charging infrastructure to the point where they have more chargers, EV chargers in the country more than the gas stations. But the issue with that is that there was no electric vehicle boom. The sales did not go up proportionally with the level of infrastructure. Not to call it a failure, but now they have this overcapacity in terms of the charging infrastructure, but not enough electric vehicles. So now the country has moved on to a hydrogen fuel cell technology, which seems pretty inefficient. So I would not call that necessarily a failure, but allocation of resources is really important when it comes to different factors that do affect the whole market growth.